Towns, Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee, visiting Cascade City today. Cascade City, did it have silver and gold or copper? What attracted people to it?
Well, Mike, it had some mineralization close to it. Old burnt basin, which wasn't too far distant. But the mineral didn't get off the ground. But there was one thing that did attract people. That was the CPR was going through. Originally, it was the Columbia Western. It was owned by a guy called Fritz Augustus Heinz, who we've alluded to before. He was the boy wonder of Butte, Montana, a multi-millionaire when millionaires were very few. He was in his 20s, and he decided that Cascade had enough water power in the Kettle River Gorge to make it pay.
So hydropower in Canada, that's what attracted him.
That's right, and this is a picture of the Cascade Gorge, and indeed, he felt that it would be the right site for a smelter, but this was 1898, and so in 1898, on the strength of his projections, they built the powerhouse, and there you see the powerhouse and the Cascade Gorge to the right, and that building is still standing today.
I think I seem to remember seeing it.
Sure, and then you see one of the pipes coming down to the powerhouse, and we used to slide down that when we were kids.
The one for generating the power.
That's right. And this is Cascade City in 1898, and this is some of the teams coming in from places like Marcus and Bossburg and all across the line, because this city was the funnel through which the traffic poured into the boundary country. And the boundary country, of course, had 3 smelters, or was going to have 3 smelters in very short order. Grand Forks and Greenwood and Phoenix and Deadwood, they were booming. And so Cascade City was going to be the funnel. This was the gateway.
I didn't think that they had such things as service centers in those days, but obviously Cascade made a go of it.
Had 1,000 people, and this is a map that I drew some years ago of the main part of Cascade, showing the Columbian Western, which eventually became the CPR because Fritz Augustus Heinz sold out to the CPR, and then you see the main street is on the top, actually the First Avenue is on the top left-hand corner of that map, and that was the big street in Cascade at that particular time. And it was really quite unique. And, of course, then there was the CPR station house, and my grandfather was a CPR agent for about, I think, 40-odd years.
And Fritz Augustus Heinz got it all cooking.
He got it cooking, then sold out to the CPR. And there's Cascade City, probably about 1899, just before the fire ripped through the town.
So fire played a role in Cascade City, too?
Yeah, it did, Mike. When they realized that Fritz Augustus Heinz was not carrying through, he'd sold out his holdings, so therefore probably the smelter plan was going to be abandoned, and indeed it was. So that was 1898. Cascade at that time was booming, 1,000 population. 1899, the businessmen realized that this town would not last. So they burned down the town, essentially, to get their fire insurance, and didn't do a good enough job in 1899, so they burned it again in 1901. And with the fire of 1901, remember there were 12 hotels, mainly along First Avenue in Cascade, and they virtually disappeared. First Avenue was a vacant street. It was just a smoldering ruin.
Did the insurance companies know about the general plan afoot here? I mean, for you to say it that boldly leads me to believe that there may have been somebody charged with arson or something from this?
They tried to prove it, but they were unsuccessful in their endeavors.
So it boomed in 98, 99, and gone by 01?
Virtually gone, except for another section of town, which was Main Street. So First Avenue, the main business section, was gone. Main Street limped on for another almost 50 years.
I have some bars in my hands here. What are these bars from?
Well, that's kind of interesting. Those are bars from the original Cascade jail, and I found those in the late 60s, and my old grandmother, I asked her where the jail was. I remember playing in the jail when I was a kid, Mike, and she said, oh, I think it's down below the lower town. I saw it once. And so anyway, we drove through. I was driving a convertible at that time, and we drove through there, and she stopped in a big clearing, which was about 40 feet by 30 feet. She said, I thought the jail was around here. And I said, I did too. And I got out of the car, and this was lying, these bars, which are hand-forged, were lying actually right under the wheels of the car.
About here.
Yeah, so she was right on the nose.
What's this? Is this? There's got to be a story to some of this. What is this cleft here?
Well, it looks like somebody used an axe trying to break into the jail at one time.
Break into the jail?
Yeah, probably trying to free a prisoner. And remember that this town later on was part of a rum runner's paradise. There were lots of illicit liquor going through into the United States because it was just about a half a mile, 3/4 mile from the U.S. border.
Did you find this bell at the same time? Did you say, Mom, where's the school? And you stopped your truck?
Actually, that's true. That is the original Cascade school bell. And the school, of course, is long gone. Some of the students are still alive, including my aunts and so on. And that's one of the few mementos from Cascade City.
I'll restrain myself from ringing the bell at this time. And there's a wonderful tea box out here. How do you pronounce Mazzawati?
Mazzawati, just like that. And that came from my old grandfather's general store. And you see, I was rather fortunate, Mike, in this town, in that I was brought up in this town, and my grandfather had the big general store there, and he served the various areas all the way around, including Christina Lake. And when we walked up the old Main Street, which was essentially a forgotten street, there were still a few places standing. And right across from my grandfather's general store was an old building called the British Mercantile. And he used it as a storage building. And we were kids of 8 or 9 years old, and I remember looking into the window of that old building, and the cobwebs were hanging down, and there was dust inside, and the boardwalk was gone. And he just closed the door. He probably didn't even keep it locked half the time. That was the type of area it was. And everything was in there. The old pitcher and basin sets, and then the coffee mills, and all the equipment from the old days, which had simply been left. And my grandfather was gradually selling this stuff out. In fact, in the 40s, the Americans were coming across the line and picking up 7-piece pitcher and basin sets for $4 and $5 and $8.
Just stuff that had been in stock for some time.
In stock since the late 1890s, the early 1900s.
Okay. Who's this man Ritchie?
Well, he's my maternal grandfather, and R.G. Ritchie, and this is his general store, and there he is out front on the left-hand side. And my aunts are there up on the... I remember walking through that general store many, many a time, and it had the smell of a general store, the old oil that you smelled in the general store. It was quite a fascinating building. My late mother and my aunts were there. And this is a picture of my grandfather and grandmother in the early days in Cascade, when Cascade was still kind of on the rise. It was still a boomtown.
Now, it looks... is this a whole photograph or just a photograph of faces? No, this is a whole photograph. This is all of them sitting there.
Yeah.
What a fine piece of work. As a matter of fact, the photographs we're taking a look at today, many of them shot by your family.
Yes. I think about half the photographs were taken by members of my family. The photos we're looking at today.
Your grandmother looks like a woman that was stylish, you know?
Well, yeah, she was a Holmes of Ottawa and came from a fairly wealthy family. My grandfather didn't. He was a meat hunter and a kind of a scout for the CPR, so there was a kind of a difference in background there, most definitely.
Some aristocratic ladies found themselves in the wilds of British Columbia.
Yeah, indeed, that was the case in this particular instance.
Romance?
Yeah, I guess.
Big family?
Yes, big family, sure.
Yeah. What a great thing to realize is in your background there.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. It was an interesting town, and I think that's where probably where I got my first initial interest in the Old West, and the ghost towns of the Old West, because some of that obviously brushed off when I was a kid.
Yeah. You mentioned the railway coming in very early. I mean, Fritz Augustus Heinz he was involved in railway business.
Sure.
So it's still a factor in this town.
Well, yes, it was for many years, and my grandfather was the CPR agent in the town, and it was a going concern. It became from the Columbia and Western, it became the CPR, and eventually it was little more than a whistle stop for many years. And indeed, when my grandfather was the agent, there wasn't really very much to do. This is a photograph of the old BC Hotel owned by the Bertois family, and this was down towards the end of Main Street, and they owned two hotels, the BC Hotel and the Cascade Hotel, which was just across the street. And they were quite an interesting family. This is, of course, one of the high points of Cascade. This is shows the old Cascade Record, which was the original newspaper in the town. Very difficult to get copies of that now, of course. Didn't last very long. And there are some of the coins that I picked up in the town itself.
Now, we also have a tray full of coins here, plus
some gold rings and so on found in the town. When
did you find these?
Well, it was funny, Mike. The Americans came into this town and virtually combed First Avenue. And my initial research indicates they got around a little over 2,000 coins out of First Avenue. And I only got two after taking 200 screens there. and they were both standing on end, so that's all the detectors missed. Virtually, that's all they missed. But they did miss some other places in the town itself. They missed the old BC Hotel, they missed the Cascade Hotel, and they missed R.G. Ritchie General Store. So I went up there and picked up about 100 coins, as well as some jewelry and some rings and so on.
Are there any coins in here that are worthy of note? I see Indian head nickels here, so the American influence is there.
Oh, you see a number of American coins in there.
British.
Yeah.
See that? Some of these are really destroyed. What's the is this because of the fires we talked about?
Well, yeah, there were some fires. Not too many on Main Street, but there were a few fires here and there, so that some of these coins were badly burned. And, of course, those coins that were discovered on First Avenue, some of those were badly burned.
Yeah. Well, the old nickels, the little tiny nickels that used to be
Sure, found lots of those. Some of those, Mike, which is really strange, I actually picked up about 7 of those right on the surface of the ground in front of the BC Hotel. And just where the original corner door had come in, and that was the first time I'd walked in there for many, many years, and I walked in there and looked down, and here were 6 or 7 old coins, American and Canadian, lying right on the surface of the ground, which is, you can't do that today, but you could do that,
that's a treasure hunter's
20 years
dream,
ago.
Eh?
Oh, sure.
What's this? This is a nickel, but it looks like it's brown. It's an Indian head. Was this one of the old...
That's one of the American coins, and that's just oxidized,
that's
actually.
Just oxidized.
Yeah.
Okay. So you found these in the 60s?
Yeah, late 60s and early 70s, Mike, yeah.
What's this? This looks like a lead slug.
That's a custom seal. And remember that, there was a lot of rum running, so they had to watch the shipments coming in on the CPR, and that's one of the seals that was found actually in one of the hotels.
Is the fact that it is not broken officially any significance?
I couldn't tell you, Mike. I didn't trace it back.
All right. So these were found in the 60s.
Yeah.
The Americans already had beaten most Canadian treasure hunters there by 10. We always seem to be sort of 10 years behind this.
Not always, but we are in a considerable number of towns. They had machines that they were using in the late 50s and early 50s, actually, after the Korean War, and sweeping some of the Canadian towns. And so by that time, Cascade was really on the decline. This particular building we see in the foreground was Laurel Ridge, owned by the Stalker family. We used to call them Auntie Stalker and Uncle Stalker, and they had been very, very wealthy people in Spokane. And this was before the Depression of 1893. Being high up in Spokane society, she had entertained all sorts of very extremely wealthy people in the same sort of milieu she was residing in. But the Depression of 1893 broke him, and all he was left with was the Cascade town site. So she actually went to work as a maid for some of the very women she had socialized with for many, many years to pay off their debts. And they eventually did pay off practically all their debts, and he was supposed to make the big comeback in Cascade City. He never did. And Cascade City continued to slip from that day on, and really from 1903 on.
An amazing woman. I mean...
She lived to be 100. She was really quite a remarkable individual.
And to have that much honor. I mean, honor overwhelmed pride.
Oh, certainly, certainly. It didn't bother her a bit. She felt that was a debt of honor. She would have to pay off that money because they actually owed it, despite the difficulties.
Auntie Stalker.
Yeah, Auntie Stalker.
1893 Depression dumped them.
Yeah. So what is left in Cascade? A few foundations here and there. That's the foundation of the old Cascade Hotel, and just across the street is the partially filled foundation of the BC Hotel, and you can see, if you look very carefully, where my old grandfather's general store was, right in the edge of the golf course. The old CPR station is gone, but the powerhouse is still down there, Mike, and the Kettle River still flows through that gorge, and beyond the powerhouse across the bridge and up on a little ridge up there, very, very hard to see, is the old Cascade Cemetery. So the whole area is kind of steeped in history, and I've made some kind of interesting discoveries close by.
And we'll talk about them when we come back from this break.
Yes.
I had a feeling that silver would enter this sometime or other, and we'll get to it right after we hear these words. Ghost Towns, Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee, and even though there's nothing there, you still find yourself drawn back to Cascade City?
Yeah, a fascinating area. It's steeped in history. It's right in the eastern gateway of the boundary country, and it's kind of an intriguing area.
And you can walk across it with the memories of your grandfather's store, and even though there's nothing there, you get right back.
That's right. I can still walk down that main street and visualize it as it was in the late 30s and early 40s.
Well, you found the coins, you say, about 1960.
Late 60s.
Late 60s. And there are still things to find, right? Still wonderful stories to discover.
Surprisingly, yes, there are. Now, that tobacco tin, which you were kind of looking at, you were intrigued with, and this has quite a story, Mike, and it's an interesting story because in the late 70s, about 1977 or 78, and I'd have to check my files to see which year it was, I was driving through this particular area and stopped by an old guy's place whom we'll refer to as Ned. And he was standing in the yard, and he was talking to a neighbor of his. Now, first of all, I knew this man for many years, and I'd purchased a number of items. He was kind of a pack rat. He collected everything from that country, and it's a good thing he did. And I purchased a number of items from him, and so I decided, I saw him in the yard, so I put the brakes on, and I called over him. I said, "Hey, Ned," I said, "have you got anything for me?" And he realized it was me, and he stopped his conversation with his neighbor, and he said, "Oh, no, Bill." He says, no, I haven't." So I got back into my car, and I thought, gee, you know something? He doesn't usually answer me like that. So I opened a book and started reading, and then he somehow excused himself from his neighbor, and the neighbor walked away, and he beckoned to me like this. I could see him still. So I said, "Well, what do you got, Ned?" "Well," he says, "come on to the shed." He said, "Behind." He says, "It's kind of an interesting thing you might be interested in." So we went into his shed behind the house, which was about an 1890s house, and the shed was about 20 feet long and only about 4 or 5 feet wide, with a high ceiling. On the east side of the shed, there were a whole bunch of windows. On the west side of the shed, there were a whole bunch of shelves and a bench. And on these shelves, he had tobacco tins with nuts and bolts and string and screws and nails, and you name it, one had a lid on it. So he took the lid off, as you just did. Yeah. He said, "What do you think of this?" So I looked in the tobacco tin, and I said, "That looks kind of interesting." I took a piece of the metal inside, and this is exactly how it looked, because this is one of the tins. And I bent it a little bit. I said, "Yeah, I'm interested." He says, "How much you got?" He says, "I've got 75 pounds. So I said, "Well, let's take a look at the rest of it." So we got a ladder from outside, Mike, a little short ladder, put it up into this hatchway into the ceiling with a flashlight. We both went up the ladder, and as I peered over his shoulder, he shone this flashlight in the attic of this little building, and there were about 12 or 14 of these tins. So he handed them down to me. I put them down on the bench below, and I opened up about 3 or 4 of these tins, and that's all. And the same sight greeted my eye. So what I was doing essentially was an eyeball assay.
What did it tell you when you went to bend this? What did you discover about it? Because some of it will bend.
That's right, but the average lead bends a lot easier than silver.
Yeah.
So therefore, I was kind of checking my assay, and I'm not that well versed in hard rock, but I have a reasonable passing knowledge in it. And so I thought there was a fair amount of silver in this particular ore. I was guessing.
Because this is not bending easy.
That's right. It doesn't bend easily. So I said, "Well, okay, I'm interested, Ned." I said, "What do you want for it?" He says, "I want $1,000. Which, at that time, you see, silver was only about $4 an ounce. So I thought, well, yeah, okay, he's going to have $1,000. And I knew I'd have to have it refined, so I said, I opened 2 more of the tins, looked in them, and I said, "I'll give you $1,350, which was $350 more than he asked.
Why?
Well, that's precisely what he said. Why? He said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I think there's more silver in there, Ned, than you think there is. And therefore, if there is, I don't want you whining, so I'm giving you a little extra." And he said, "No," he said, "all found for me." He said, "I got it behind the assayer's office wall when I wrecked it." And he said, "That's a deal." So I gave him $800 cash, which I had in my back pocket, a check for $550, bundled this stuff into the car, and took off through the boundary country and got up to Greenwood. Got to Greenwood, decided I'd take a look at another one of these tins, and did take another look at one of these tins, and found that it looked a little more like lead, so I started having some misgivings. But with this guy, a deal was a deal, so I was stuck with it. Went over to Anarchist, down into Assaying, opened another tin, looked at, was convinced it was lead. Finally got up to Okanagan Falls, took in a handful of this stuff into a guy called Herb Bond, who was an old friend of mine, and he owned the rock shop in Okanagan Falls. And I said, "Herb," I said, "what do you think of this?" He said, "It looks pretty rich to me." I said, "How can you tell?" He said, "Well," he says, "I'll put it on the burner, and we'll turn up the heat, and silver," he said, "melts at 1,761 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that. And he said, if it goes above 11 or 1,200 degrees, there's a high percentage of silver. You're going to do all right on it." So with bated breath, he put this pound of metal on this block, turned it up, and went up 10, 11, 12, 13, 16, and eventually over 1,700 degrees. He was astonished. He said it's almost pure silver. It was 96% pure, which is purer than sterling. The whole thing was worth a little over, when the price went up a year and a half later, it was worth about $40,000. There was over 1,000 ounces of silver.
Old Ned got paid $13.50, and you got $40,000 in silver?
Well, approximately, yes. But
these are the bars from that stuff?
Yeah, these are some of the bars from the original consignment. I picked up scores and scores of bars from it, and I still deal with him, by the way, and he's quite aware of it.
Did Ned get a bonus for Christmas?
No, because we'd always agreed that a deal was a deal, and that was the way it was. And I just bought, by the way, a very interesting item from him just a few months ago.
That's the story of Cascade City. We'll be back next week with more Gold Trails and Ghost Towns.